Historically, the mob was always conceivably known for its violence. Up until 2013, all of the five families have littered the streets of New York with bodies, thus causing average citizens to not only fear the mob, but be intimidated by their violent reputation. Just an off-the-cuff comment could end one's life. For instance, when Vito Borelli, the boyfriend of Connie Castellano, made a comparison comment about her father, Paul Castellano, who was a Gambino captain at the time and the future head of the family. Castellano, who wasn't a fan of Borelli to begin with, learned of the disrespectful comment and decided to have him killed. Whispers of a murder like Borelli's gets around, further instilling fear in the public. During the 1970s, a number of informants and those suspect were being killed on a regular basis by .22 caliber pistols. A great deal of those murders were carried out by a Genovese hit team that was supervised by Chin Gigante. So it wasn't only the public experience and fear, but members of the mob as well. These murders were a warning of what would happen if anyone cooperated with law enforcement. Up until the last 2 decades or so, if a person put their hands on a member, the punishment was death, and society fully understood that the mob doled out its own form of punishment. If a car thief robbed a car belonging to the mob or someone associated to them, in most instances, the car thief would be killed. At times, the mob killed innocent victims, as was the case on April 19, 1979, in Suffolk County, Long Island. 18-year-old Dominic Ragucci, a student and vacuum salesman, was mistaken for a Cuban assassin, chased down, and shot and killed by Gambino member Roy DeMeo. The mob had no problem with killing women either. Mary Botti, a girlfriend of Alphonse Persico, who was considered a liability and ordered to be murdered. On September 25, 1984, she was lured to a social club and shot to death. The mob was also unforgiving when it came to mistakes. Following the December 1978 Lufthansa airline heist, a number of people involved in the robbery were killed, like Parnell Stacks Edwards, who didn't dispose of a van used in the robbery. On December 18, 1978, Edwards was discovered shot to death in his Queens apartment. And if the mob deemed you a threat, they had one solution: they would kill you. Joe Gallo was known to challenge the authority of both the Profaci and what would later become known as the Colombo family. On April 7, 1972, Gallo and a group of people went out for his birthday and was spotted. A Colombo hit team was dispatched to Umberto's Clam House, where Gallo was enjoying his birthday dinner, and was shot to death. Dominic Mimichalo, a feared Colombo captain from Coney Island, Brooklyn, was known for numerous murders and put together a secret crew that he used for unsanctioned hits and to stick up card and crap games at local social clubs. In addition, in and around January 1974, he insulted Carlo Gambino in a Brooklyn restaurant. Shortly after, Mimi disappeared, and his remains were found 9 months later in the basement of a Colombo social club. Carmine Galante made a grab for power within the Bonanno family and not only declared himself the boss, but the boss of all bosses. In addition, he had members of other families killed over the drug business. On July 12, 1979, Galante was killed while sitting on the back patio of his cousin's Brooklyn restaurant. One of the people involved in that murder was his former bodyguard, Cesare Bonventri, who was given a captain position following Galante's murder. Over time, Bonventri gained wealth and power and was viewed as an obstacle for future boss Joe Massino, who instigated his murder. On April 16, 1984, Bonventri was lured to a meeting and killed just outside a garage of a Maspeth Queens chop shop. These are just a few of a boatload of murders where the mob killed members that they felt was a threat. They even dealt out deadly punishment when it came to accidents. On March 18, 1980, John Gotti's son Frank was hit by a car while riding a mini bike and unfortunately died. The person driving that car was a neighbor of Gotti's, John Favara. 4 months after the incident, on July 28, 1980, a crew of guys abducted Favara near his job, and he's never been seen again. Word started spreading regarding how Favara was disposed of, and naturally when average citizens hears about this, it deepens their fear of the mob. something that the mob benefited from throughout the years. Being the boss of a family is an esteemed position. Nonetheless, the boss has two main dangers. One is a given. The government and the FBI places on him the largest bullseye. And the second being, most of the members want his position. Each family is replete with members known as Young Turks, filled with ambition. Throughout the mob's history, hits and attempted hits were carried out on bosses, and the plotters would consequently replace them. During the mid-'80s, Gambino boss Paul Castellano became laser-focused on John Gotti and his crew involving drug dealing, a rule that carried the punishment of death. Numerous members in the past have been killed for violating this rule. On December 16, 1985, Castellano and his underboss, Tommy Bellotti, were headed to a meeting at a Manhattan steakhouse. And on a side note, you'll notice that meetings are the usual means to set a guy up to be killed. As Castellano and Bellotti were exiting their car, a hit team approached them and blasted away. This incident, like the majority of those mentioned, was plastered all over the news and the newspapers. Members, associates, and the average civilians all watched the news or read the newspapers and received the same message, which is the mob's a violent organization that murders people, a message that rang loud and clear. Nothing excites the FBI more than mob violence and, of course, murders. At that point, it's all systems go, and they receive permission from their superiors to do whatever it takes to solve these crimes. Big budgets are allocated for these investigations, and they receive a great deal of overtime. In the early 90s, the FBI had a field day when the Colombo family had an internal war and turned the streets of New York into a literal war zone where members and associates of both factions were being killed. Job security for the FBI. Nevertheless, the downside for the mob was that the FBI was investigating, and all that violence led to indictments and long prison sentences. The last official mob murder was carried out by the Lucchese family. Michael Melnish, one of the leaders of the infamous East Harlem Purple Gang, was an associate of the Lucchese family, whose acting boss at the time was Matty Madonna. Melnish was known to be extremely capable and would get himself into several problems, with each one causing a domino effect to the next. One of those problems involved money owed to Matty. There came a point where Melnish lost any of the love and respect that he once had for Matty, which caused him to say some disrespectful things to Matty. So in typical mob fashion, on November 13, 2013, Melnish was lured to a meeting in an area of the Bronx and killed by someone he considered a friend. Naturally, the FBI went into action and investigated the murder, which resulted in the Lucchese leadership and its members to be indicted in May of 2017. On April 15, 2019, that trial ended in convictions, and by the following year, all of the defendants were handed life sentences. Since then, the mob, and precisely its bosses, decided to do away with violence, especially murder, and fully understood what the outcome would be if they deviated. Prior to the Lucchese indictments, Matty Madonna and the family's consigliere, Joe DiNapoli, received sentences on another case, which left a void in the administration, and Stevie Crea, the underboss, as king of the hill. The Brooklyn faction's Young Turks seized the opportunity to make a move, and I can attest to the fact that they were fully prepared to respond violently if things didn't go according to plan. But not a shot was fired. Essentially, Stevie Crea handed over the family's leadership, which was gladly taken, and the base of power was moved from the Bronx to their home turf in Brooklyn. I recently mentioned that the mob lowered its bar. Without the need for violence, they began accepting guys who were not capable, allowing businessmen into their fold, with money being the major objective. The West Side, of all people, inducted someone by the name of Chris Ciaccio, who let Angelo Grattalone, a Gambino associate at the time, put a knife to his throat and threaten him, but did nothing about it. No retaliation whatsoever, which is a total embarrassment to the West Side. Ciaccio was also in a Manhattan restaurant when I threatened him and his crew of guys at their table. His reaction was to call my captain, Big John, up, and minutes later, he and his crew left the restaurant with their appetizers still warm on the table. The following morning, he called up Bubsy, pleading with him to squash the beef because he couldn't sleep all night. I remember telling Bubsy I slept just fine. The Lucchese family inducted Butch Arpino and Danny Campo. Butch was someone who admitted to not being a tough guy, which is fine. Not everyone's a tough guy in this world, and I respect that. I remember internally shaking my head when he asked me one day, "How do you let another guy know that you're a friend, meaning a member, if he doesn't know you?" Butch was clueless to that life and was just a nice guy, a piece of bread, and never should have entered that life. Just to give some clarity, when I call Danny Campo a coward or a punk, these are not my words, but the words of his childhood friend, Patty Delarusso. One night when a drunk customer began harassing Danny's girl, who was a barmaid, as well as taking unauthorized pictures of her, she went to Danny and told him what was happening. And the guy was 2 feet away from him. But instead of confronting the guy, Danny came and got me, which resulted in me no longer being able to go to the place anymore because the cops took the security tapes, which were blurry, thank God. During my final days in that life, Patty told me, "Please give Danny a call. The guy's hiding in his house, scared to death." Not a good candidate to induct into a family. As far as the nonviolence, there were some guys who initially didn't want to accept this new lifestyle. When everything was taking place with me, one day I met Johnny Sideburns, and he warned me not to meet with anyone and told me, "Georgie Neck and these guys who just came home think this is still the 1980s. They want to clip this and clip that." Sideburns was beating around the bush, but giving me a heads up at the same time. Please remember to like this video if you haven't already, as it helps with YouTube's algorithm. And for anyone who'd like to show their appreciation for videos like this one, or to help me keep this podcast going, you can do so by the Super Thanks icon down below, or the PayPal Cash App links in the video's description. Here's the problem that the mob put itself in. They counted on remnant memories of their past acts of violence to carry them and keep the public in fear. And it worked for a few years. However, when civilians and the public see these faces that represent the modern-day mob, that fear no longer exists.